we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
Right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum?
Like, what exactly, like, what are the regulations in terms of, like, what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But after the fact, he's like, still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
That's the issue. Was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the House media that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative. Will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do. I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused like scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that. It's almost used. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements, and so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through. And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like I forgot. It's so silly. You find executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, he lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too.
Views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. And they've recently been shut down. But the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better, or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? Ethereum? What are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with Reagan, it was like 70,000 or something like that?
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something. Why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. Just where's the money? I don't know, but he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like there's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
In the terms of service, they said results may vary. what's that about?
Mm.
I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology. And I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had Lizzie on Twitter. I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and they have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, "Hey, you put your money with us. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to move it." That's what FTX is. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it, like.
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, all these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal, all these other wallets, that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar to what that was, to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like, they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our victims. Would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. But ultimately, the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me. I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me.
And sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today, or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this an...
Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually...
And then when you have him on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and...
Basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten, was going to undo sort of everything. Like, if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great, and like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does that work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Capital. Sort of, this is a fraud because, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark, because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. And that video has aged so well because it's like, people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cahotis, he's a famous short seller. He was if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. There launches FTX in 2019, and that's a crypto platform where honestly you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity. That means playing League of Legends while on investor calls. Like, at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
On calls. You could hear, even actually... Okay.
Binance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs, and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so... It's just... the problem is a lot of it's a black box. his whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called, what I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store. I didn't really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like just like the like, hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these like get rich similar success. 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this outright. The proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of
regulated. Like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC.
I don't really understand what's going. Like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, "What is happening? Like, what are they doing?" Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
like they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX. Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance?
He said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors because it's like if I give money to you to give located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners, like, and you won this round or you won the war
because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
This thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time, so he decides to donate dark to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his...
one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their dark, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be... Your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually fine, but FTX was sort of the worst offender, is... Let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything. You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit. Like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. I have two employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, he's Washington. And I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To how you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam, or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking why the celebrities are important. And that's why
it's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part. Yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, the son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was, I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, everybody, I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. But he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you
gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources with regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately, Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy he's the son of two Harvard lawyers. There were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that was they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. This Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like deal, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people had backed
down because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
You never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is of ads, like get-rich-quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis telling you, they're like 25 years old telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. Scandal now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I was a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist, or something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're
wild. The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse. This $40 billion penthouse. The things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish.
I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up, or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just, what are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then he's like, well, like think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his easier or more profitable for him?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot.
Bizarre that so many people got duped, and I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, I need to go start trading with it, unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. Crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So like look at the Turkish lira. Eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when and so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal. Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it, but it's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world. And that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. At the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, he'd be afraid of being indicted. Or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal with crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But I start hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is.
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real.
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. They're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like this big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. Senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to – this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, the CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was – it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly some of what's was going on. Now he's still trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big kind of scam
people that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was really everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people noticed, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. They had a serum token, which they control most of, very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer, right, people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated to change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. What is the difference between the two?
You can know their assets. So it's a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on-chain all our who enabled God or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other people, or it's just well,
how does he skate on that? How?
That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy labeled the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured, really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. He's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, I can't lose. It's almost, betting on the house. There was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. Everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now,
each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. It sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Sam was just hopped up on caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it.
Right.
It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks every time the government's printing a bunch of money. Where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild too. The whole scene was wild.
Just kind of grifting here, and so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then, as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch, and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31.
Involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been. You're the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did a lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams, do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese...
Analogy for losing your house?
You know what's funny? Yeah.
You know, I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. Annoying. So like
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America, and they have to file all these